Racist boss fires black veteran janitor. What happens in court stuns everyone. The courtroom fell so silent you could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Luther stood as the verdict was read aloud, not flinching, not blinking. The same hands that had once carried wounded men through enemy fire now gripped the wooden railing, calm, weathered and still. Judge Collins's voice echoed. This court finds that Mr. Williams's termination was racially motivated, unjust, and in direct violation of civil rights law. Damages totaling $2.4 million are awarded to the plaintiff, and the defendant's conduct is referred for formal review. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Brandon Keller's face turned pale. The same man who once mocked a veteran, behind closed doors, now stared into the abyss of consequences. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned in. And through it all, Luther remained quiet. No smile, no tears, just a steady gaze forward, as if seeing the ghosts of every man who'd ever been silenced before him finally find their voice. "Sir, how do you feel about the outcome?" a reporter called as he exited the courthouse. Luther paused. "I feel like truth finally stood up, and this time it stayed standing." If that moment gave you chills, just wait. This is a story about power, prejudice, and the resilience of a man who refused to be erased. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our powerful, real-life inspired stories that shake your soul and open your eyes. Now let's take it back to where it all began. Every morning, before the city even blinked open its eyes, Luther was already there, his boots echoing faintly down the empty marble corridors of the law firm Thompson & Myers. At 64, his back was slightly stooped, his knees not what they used to be, and his left leg dragged just a little when he walked, a permanent reminder of the war he had once fought. But he showed up every day at 4 a.m. with his faded blue janitor's uniform neatly pressed, and a quiet dignity in his step. No one really noticed him. He was the man who made the office sparkle before the lawyers arrived in their $1,000 suits and pretended the building cleaned itself. He emptied their trash, wiped their spilled coffee, and polished the glass walls that reflected everyone but him. 12 years. 12 years of loyalty. 12 years of showing up before sunrise and leaving long after the city was on its second drink. Yet in all that time, Luther had never been invited to a holiday party, never received a single thank you note. He was just the janitor, the invisible man with the mop. Then Brandon arrived, young, sharp-suited, fresh from some Ivy League school, and full of arrogance disguised as ambition, the new managing partner, the kind who wore expensive watches not to tell time but to tell class, the kind who smiled only when he wanted something and frowned when he saw something or someone beneath him. The first time he saw Luther, he didn't greet him. He didn't ask his name, he just said, "The floors better be spotless by the time the board gets here," then walked off like Luther was part of the furniture. The air changed after that. Cold glances, sudden inspections, petty complaints. One morning it was a smudge on the glass door. Luther had just cleaned it. The next day a funny smell in the break room. Luther hadn't even been on that floor. Whispers traveled through the office like static electricity. The new boss doesn't like old people, especially old black ones. No one said it out loud, of course, that would be dangerous, but it was in the way Brandon looked at Luther, like a stain that wouldn't scrub out. Then it happened. No warning, no meeting, just a folded memo on his cart. Brandon's assistant told him coldly, "You're terminated, effective immediately." No handshake, no explanation, just that sterile corporate smile and a nod toward the exit. Luther didn't speak. He didn't argue. He just took off his gloves, folded them neatly, and placed them beside his cart. He picked up his cardboard box, the one he had brought from home with a few family pictures and his old war medals tucked deep at the bottom, and walked out of the building where he had scrubbed the floors of justice for over a decade. As he reached the revolving door, one of the young interns held it open for him. The intern whispered, "This ain't right, sir." Luther paused, gave him a small nod and said softly, "Son, this country taught me to fight for what's right. I may have left the battlefield, but I haven't stopped fighting." He stepped, Out into the cold morning light, his breath fogging the air. He had been erased, discarded like a used rag, but deep inside, something had awakened. 1 week after Luther left the firm, the headlines in the city's legal circles exploded like a grenade tossed into a boardroom. Black veteran janitor sues prestigious law firm for racial discrimination. The name Luther Williams was suddenly everywhere, from newspapers to news feeds to office gossip. At first, the firm tried to downplay it. Their press statement was cold and calculated. Thompson & Myers upholds a standard of excellence and equality. The recent allegations brought by a former employee are without merit. But inside the office, lawyers shifted nervously in their chairs. Secretaries looked at each other with wide eyes. And Brandon, well, Brandon smirked. "Let him try," he said. One morning over espresso. "It's his word against mine. He's a janitor. I run the firm." But Luther wasn't alone. His case was taken pro bono by Maya Rivera, a young civil rights attorney whose name was gaining respect fast. Small in frame, but fierce in court, Maya had fire in her voice and justice in her veins. She had read about Luther's story and met him in a quiet coffee shop near the Veterans Hospital. As they sat down, Maya asked gently, "Why do you want to fight this?" Luther stirred his tea slowly and said, "Because I gave this country everything, and still I'm treated like I don't belong. I'm tired of disappearing so others can stay comfortable." She nodded. "Then let's make them uncomfortable." The courtroom was not packed the first day. Just a few reporters, a few curious interns, and a couple of Luther's old friends from the VA center. But it didn't stay quiet for long. Maya's opening statement struck with precision. "My client is not just a janitor. He is a veteran, a citizen, a man with dignity. What happened to him wasn't a clerical error. It was a decision, a deliberate act to erase a human being because of the color of his skin and the years on his face." The firm's defense tried to keep things clinical. Brandon's lawyer insisted Luther was let go due to performance concerns. They showed reports that questioned his efficiency, claimed that complaints had been filed, though none had names or dates. All hearsay, all fog. Then Maya stood. One by one she called up former employees, interns, even a night security guard. A young paralegal, shaking slightly, said, "I saw Luther clean that conference room 3 times in one morning because Mr. Brandon kept saying it wasn't shiny enough. But it was spotless." Another testified, "I heard the boss say nothing kills morale like seeing that old janitor mop around every morning." Each statement chipped away at the corporate facade until cracks began to show. Then came the surveillance footage. Maya obtained weeks of time-stamped security footage. Clip after clip showed Luther arriving on time, cleaning beyond his duties, even helping a senior partner pick up papers after hours. No slouch, no incompetence. Then she pulled out something no one expected. A copy of a letter signed by a US president commending Luther for bravery during combat. In the heat of battle, Corporal Luther Williams pulled 2 wounded soldiers from enemy fire and refused evacuation until every man in his unit was safe. The courtroom fell silent, and then the moment that changed everything. Maya turned to Luther sitting silently in his suit, too big for his frame, worn only for funerals, and now justice. She asked him to stand and share his story. He didn't. Read from a paper. He didn't raise his voice. He spoke slowly, from memory. "I was 21 when I stepped on a landmine. It didn't blow, but it shattered the bones in my leg. They said I might not walk again, but I did. And I kept walking. Into buildings, into schools, into jobs where I wasn't welcomed. And still, I walked. Because I believed that if I gave everything, I'd be treated fairly." He looked directly at Brandon, whose face had turned pale. "But what hurts more than war wounds is knowing that after all these years, someone like you, someone who never knew sacrifice, can look at someone like me and see nothing worth keeping." No one breathed. Even the judge blinked slowly, stunned. Then an unexpected figure stood up in the gallery. Edward Myers, one of the senior founding partners of the firm, long since retired. He cleared his throat and said, "I served with Luther. Back then, he saved my life. And now I've watched this firm disgrace itself by turning its back on someone who once carried me through enemy fire. I am ashamed." Brandon tried to object. to twist the story back in his favor. But the room no longer listened to his voice. The judge recessed for deliberation. Maya and Luther sat side by side outside the courtroom. He looked tired, drained, but peaceful. "I didn't think my story mattered anymore," he whispered. Maya smiled. Sometimes the truth just needs the right room to echo in. The courtroom reconvened the next morning. Outside the building, a small crowd had gathered. Journalists, veterans, law students, and citizens who had heard whispers of a janitor who once dragged bodies from battlefields and now stood, once, again for something worth saving. Luther sat quietly at the plaintiff's table. He wore the same suit, but somehow it looked different now, straighter at the shoulders, firmer in the spine. Maya was beside him, flipping through her notes, though she didn't need them. The room buzzed with a strange energy, not one of spectacle, but of reckoning. Judge Collins entered, stern and composed. A woman known for her no-nonsense demeanor, she had presided over corporate fraud, civil rights clashes, and political scandals. But today she looked like she had aged a decade overnight. She adjusted her glasses, then began to read the ruling. This court finds that the termination of Mr. Luther Williams was not based on performance, nor due process, but rather a pattern of racially motivated hostility and age discrimination. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His jaw clenched, but his eyes avoided everyone's. The judge continued. "It is the opinion of this court that Mr. Williams's dismissal was not only unjust, it was inhumane. To disregard a man's decades of service, to silence his dignity behind corporate jargon, and to strip him of his place without cause is not only unethical, it is dangerous." She then looked directly at Luther. "Mr. Williams, this nation owes you more than medals. It owes you respect." A soft gasp swept the courtroom. The judge turned her attention back to the legal order. The court awards Mr. Williams back pay for the last year, a public written apology to be issued by Thompson and Myers, and $2.4 million in damages for racial and emotional harm. Furthermore, this court recommends that Mr. Brandon Keller be investigated by the state bar for unethical conduct. Brandon stood up, red-faced, about to speak, but the judge cut him off. "You've already said enough." Cameras flashed as the courtroom erupted. Some clapped, others cried. But Luther remained still. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the apology. It was the truth. Finally spoken, finally heard. Outside the courthouse, microphones swarmed toward him. "Mr. Williams, how do you feel?" He looked into the crowd, then up at the morning sky. "I feel like I'm standing again. Not just for me, but for every invisible man who's ever been told he doesn't belong." A young black janitor, maybe 25, stood nearby in his own faded uniform. He wiped his eyes. "You made it easier for the rest of us, sir." Luther reached out, shook his hand, and said, "Now you keep walking forward, son. Don't let them erase you." Weeks passed. The firm tried to clean up its image. Diversity initiatives, press conferences, all the usual damage control. But some wounds don't fade with PR. As for Luther, he didn't keep the money for himself. He used a large portion to establish a scholarship fund for low-income veterans seeking education or legal aid. He named it the Silent March Foundation. When asked why, he replied, "Because sometimes the people who make the most difference are the ones you never saw coming." And Maya? She kept fighting. Her phone never stopped ringing after that trial, but she always said it wasn't her victory, it was Luther's. He walked through hell more than once and came out standing. I just made sure people listened this time. In a quiet neighborhood not far from the courthouse, Luther lived out his days tending a small garden, attending Sunday services, and speaking to young men about dignity, purpose, and truth. He never saw himself as a hero. But those who heard his story did, and every so often someone from the firm would walk past the plaque in the lobby. A man once cleaned these floors. Now he taught us what it means to stand tall, if you're moved by real powerful stories like this one. Don't forget to like the video to support our work. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story, and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with every new upload. We bring you emotional, inspiring, and eye-opening stories that deserve to be heard. Your support helps us share voices that matter. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next story that might just change the way you see the world.